Good morning and thanks for joining us today. My name's Michael Jameson. I'm VP for Zycoo here in Europe. Welcome to this, our second training event of the week. Hopefully you had the opportunity to attend Tuesday's sales training, which gave an overview of UC Pro software, including a demonstration of some of the software's powerful features. Today we have a more technical session, and you're going to learn how to install UC Pro and also how to configure it. I'll shortly hand over to Phil to start the training event. There is quite a lot of content to cover today, so if you do have any questions during the session, then please do raise them using the questions chat feature, and myself and Javier in the background will do our best to answer them for you. So I hope you enjoyed today's event, and on that, over to you, Phil.
So just to double check, can you see my screen okay, Michael?
Yeah, I can see that. That's fine, Phil.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Michael. Good morning, everyone, and welcome along to this technical training session. So those of you that were here with us on Tuesday saw the sales presentation, and in that presentation we, as Michael said, provided you with information about the product. We explained what the product actually does. Today's session is all about getting the product actually installed, up and running, and properly configured. It's going to take about an hour to go through this session. Lots of information to go through. As Michael says, if you've got any questions as we go along, use the chat facility, and Michael and Javier will answer those questions for you. We're also recording the session, as we did on Tuesday, so there'll be a video available of this session if you're having problems taking it all in one go. You can watch the video later on and pick up the extra information after that. So the bit of a prerequisite really, we were kind of assuming with this presentation that you've seen the sales presentation. So it kind of assumes you understand what the product does. I'm not going to be explaining the product again as we did on Tuesday. If you haven't seen the sales presentation, then probably what you're going to need to do is obviously watch this presentation, but then go back and look at the sales so you better understand the product itself. We're going to start off with the installation of the UC Pro server. In terms of the actual server, the hardware that you install onto, we kind of break it down into three separate areas, depending whether it's a small single-site customer, or whether it's a medium multi-site customer with up to 6 sites, or maybe even a large multi-site customer with something like 4,000 calls per hour. So depending on the type of customer that you're dealing with, the amount of users they're going to have, the amount of calls going through the system, we kind of determine them as single, medium, or large. The reason I've done that is the next slide then shows you the operating system requirements depending on the size of that customer. As you'll see though, all of the most recent versions of the Windows operating system, I should have mentioned already that the server only operates on the Windows operating system, but they're all supported except right down in the far bottom corner. What we're suggesting is probably not a good idea to use Windows 7 for a large multi-site customer. Highly unlikely you'd want to do that, but that's really the only one that's really got a consideration. A couple of things down below, you might not be able to read this text on my screen, but what it's saying is that virtual environments are supported, so it could be a VMware Hyper-V type situation that's supported for the UC Pro server. If it's a single site, we mentioned this in the sales training, it can actually coexist with other applications, so you don't have to have a brand new empty server to install on. If you've got a fairly small customer, the UC Pro server will quite happily coexist with other applications on a server. Obviously, the ideal world is if you can give it a dedicated server, then fantastic. That's the best option in terms of performance. In terms of memory and hard disk drive requirements, not a great deal. Between up to 20 gigabytes of hard disk required, between 2 and 4 gigabytes of memory. So not particularly extensive requirements. We do recommend that it's a network adapter connection to a TCP/IP network, so rather than a wireless connection. So that's definitely required. In terms of the processor requirement, the actual processor itself, depending what you're working with, whatever the operating system is that you're going with, then we're basically saying here, well, whatever Microsoft suggests is the server requirement for that operating system, then go with that. As long as that fits that requirement, you should be okay. You'll see a little bit later that we use SQL in the background. If the customer doesn't already have SQL installed on that server, no problem, because that gets installed as part of the installation process. We use SQL Server Express in most situations, except for very, very large multi-sites, It actually works fine with that as well, but we can also use SQL Server 2008 R2 for that as well. Generally that's taken care of as part of the installation. You'll see that in a moment. I should also mention that if the customer already has SQL Server installed on the server that you're doing the installation, then we just create another instance for the UC Pro server. In terms of actually getting the software to be able to do the installation, go to the Zycoo website. I've got it up and running here. If you go into Products and you go into Value-Added Software and UC Pro, and there's lots of sort of good information about the product, lots of stuff that we had on the sales presentation on Tuesday. Scroll right to the bottom, there's a software download section, and from here you can download the Windows client, the Mac client, and the server as well, so you can get the downloads from there. So what you need to do the installation is obviously get a copy of the most recent copy of the setup program. Even if you downloaded it last week, we still strongly recommend you go back to the website if you're doing a new download this week, just to make sure you have the very, very latest version. They do change quite frequently. The only other things you're really going to need is the IP address of the CUBOX phone system itself. We need to know where that phone system resides on the network, and you're going to need the customer's license serial number as well in order to get the product actually up and running. So that's the only three things you really need to do the installation. You basically just double click on the installation program, pretty standard stuff, work through the installation screens. You don't actually have to make too many decisions, you just click next, 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 as long as you don't want to change the default location where the files are going to be stored. Takes a couple of minutes at the most. The only time it takes a bit longer is if there's no SQL server on the system already. In that case, it has to download a little bit more information, a few more files for the Microsoft SQL server, but literally maximum of 5 minutes to do the installation on most occasions. A couple of installation notes. First of all, the UC Pro clients, we'll talk about a little bit later this morning, they communicate with the UC Pro server over TCP port 21050. We also use port 21059 for a detect button when you're on the configuration. I'll show you that a little bit later. That's a way we can actually locate the server without actually having to put in the server address. So those two ports, you need to make sure that your local firewall will allow those ports through. Normally that happens okay, not usually much of a problem. The installation program takes care of that. Occasionally if you've got a non-standard firewall, you may have to actually just do that allowing manually, but more often than not it works fine. Anyway, after you've done the installation and it's completed, then you'll get an installation wizard automatically start up. I'm going to show you some PowerPoint slides of this first stage because I don't want to actually try and do an installation live on this demonstration. It will take just a little bit longer. So I've got the product already installed. Once we've done the initial installation, then I'll switch to doing a live demonstration and show you the rest of the configuration. So these are just a few screen grabs just to show you how it works. The idea of the installation wizard is that it takes you through the most important screens in the configuration. So there's 3 or 4 screens you need to go through to do a basic installation configuration of the product, and literally within 10 minutes you're up and running. There's lots of other things you can configure. We'll look at those later, but just to get up and running, it takes no more than 10 minutes. So you click on the installation wizard option, and the first screen it takes you to is the licensing screen. All pretty self-explanatory. You put in the details of the customer that you're doing the installation for. Put in the customer's license code as well. That's obviously required. When you click the Register Online button, that actually connects to the UC Pro licensing server to make sure that the code is correct. Assuming that it is, you'll get a confirmation message telling you that everything is fine, that everything is working fine. You'll also see the display down below that originally said this software is not registered. Once you've registered it correctly, it then gives you a display of what is actually registered with that particular code. I'm going to show you a better example of that a little bit later in the configuration, but it literally shows you what that client is licensed for, or products the client is licensed for. So that's the license registration. There's a manual method of doing this as well. The previous method I've shown you requires the server that you're doing the installation on to be properly connected to the internet to be able to communicate with the licensing server. In very rare situations, you may find that the server that you want to do the installation on, for whatever reason, is maybe behind a firewall, or maybe it doesn't have internet connectivity at that point, and in that case you wouldn't be able to do the registration. What you can do though is you can actually do the manual registration. You can go to another device, go onto the UC Pro zycoo.com/register web page, put in the address, and what you then get is like an unlock code. You then go back to the server where you're doing the installation, put the unlock code in, and then the software is then licensed for you. So it means that you don't need to have the internet connection on the server that you're trying to set up the licensing on. You can get that unlock code from somewhere else that does have that internet connection. Unlikely going to use that very often, but it's there if you need it. The software itself, when you download it, is actually available on a 30-day trial. So you don't have to have the software fully licensed to be able to demonstrate it to the customer. You can use the full 30-day trial. It's not a cut-down version of the product. Often when you do trials these days, you get the product, but half of the things don't work. They're all grayed out. This is a full trial. Everything works. You get a couple of client licenses, etc. You get an operator license. Everything works as designed. The only thing that makes it a trial is it expires after the 30 days. In order to get the trial up and running, just leave the serial number blank, so obviously don't fill in the serial number field, and click register for trial rather than register online, and that'll actually sort of register the software as a trial. The next screen that you get taken to in the licensing in the wizard is the site screen. Not much to add in here. Give the site a name. It could be the company's name, but if it's a company that has multiple locations, we'll talk about federation a little bit later, then just give it the name of the location of that particular head office or that particular office. Just give it a meaningful name. Very important that you pick the correct language and that you pick the correct country and also the correct area code as well. The software needs to know where the users are located and where they're dialing from to append the correct dialing codes when they're actually using the software. So make sure that they are correctly set up for the location of where this particular UC Pro server is going to be located. The next screen you come to is the telephone system itself. And the little drop-down box at the top, the type drop-down box, pick the Zycoo QVOX as the device. And then the screen changes slightly and asks you a few additional questions. You need to put in the IP address of the phone system. We assume that you would know that. You're doing the installation of that phone system. You need to put in the operator password also for authentication to make sure that you can actually access that phone system. The auto create, when you tick that box, what that does is it downloads all of the extension information from the phone system to UC Pro. We're going to look at that in a few moments time as well. But that's very important that you tick that box so that you download all that extension information. You can add it manually to UC Pro, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that when you already have that information available to you. And then when you click save, it'll actually download that information. Just a brief note at the bottom, the operator is disabled by default on QVOX systems, so you need to enable that first of all, going into system and management on the QVOX web GUI interface. So you need to sort of enable that first of all. Also a note about asterisk AMI. UC Pro requires asterisk AMI. We mentioned that in the sales presentation. You'll find that it's blocked by default in the QVOX inbuilt firewall. What you need to do, as the screen grab shows, is either just delete the rule that's refusing it in the first place, or precede that rule with a rule that actually accepts it through the firewall. So you need to make sure that that's set up correctly as well as part of the installation process. Alternatively, you can actually use the demonstration phone system. So if you're on the webinar on Tuesday, you would have seen me doing a demonstration of the product. I wasn't connected to a phone system at all. It may have appeared as though I was making lots of calls and doing lots of other things, but I was actually using the demonstration system. And this is a really powerful feature. It means you can literally go into a client and demonstrate the product to them, even without a phone system available to talk to. You can show them the full product, show them exactly what it can do without requiring to be connected to a phone system. All you do is you just select the demonstration from the type box rather than the real phone system. That then generates a few users and generates a few other bits and pieces that allow you to do the demonstration. We'll be providing you with that demonstration software so you can use that and demonstrate to your customers. So if you remember a moment ago, I said if you click the, go back to the previous screen just to show you, if you click this auto create box, when you click save, what will happen is that all of the extensions will then be downloaded from the phone system. If you've got names against those extensions, those names will come through as well. And you should see the status coming through. My screen grab isn't actually the correct one. It should show either on hook or off hook that would show the state of that particular extension. In this particular example, there's probably a bit of a problem there. Things haven't come through quite right, but normally you'd expect to see them on hook or off hook. If more than 10 seconds goes past and you don't see your list of extensions, there's probably a problem, and the most likely problem that we see is that the IP address that you put in for the phone system is incorrect. Normally, if you've got that IP address correct and there are extensions defined in the phone system, they will come through correctly. You can also edit this information from here at this point if you want to. So, for example, when you click on Edit, opens up the dialog for that particular extension, and you can add names in here. For example, if there aren't names actually on the phone system, you can add them in here. Important point to note here is any changes you make to the sort of the description of these extensions in UC Pro does not get reflected back to the phone system. So you're not updating the phone system. You've taken the information from the phone system and now you're adding additional information. It's quite useful having names, because when you see on the present screen, when I was doing the demonstration on Tuesday, when you're looking at extensions, if certain users do use that particular extension, users are tied to extensions, it's always good to show the user's name as well. Even though users appear in the present screen elsewhere, as a user, it's nice to have the extensions labeled up if it really does belong to one particular user. There's other boxes that you can tick down below when you're defining the extensions. I wouldn't suggest you get into this in the early stages, but there's quite a few sort of nice features here. For example, there may be certain extensions that get downloaded from the phone system that you don't want those extensions to be visible on the present screen. So, for example, you may have a telephone in a meeting room, and you wouldn't want that to be visible on the present screen, because you wouldn't want people necessarily trying to transfer calls to to a phone in a meeting room. There's also one that requires users to log in, so that they can't use the software without actually being logged in. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So various things that you can configure for the extensions, but certainly in the short term when you're doing the initial installation, just download the extensions, maybe add some names to them, but that's really all you need to do. It's taken me about 5 or 10 minutes to talk you through that, but in reality, that stage of going through the installation wizard takes no more than 5 minutes. It's a very quick process, and at that point you're literally up and running. You have a server up and running and functional, and if you go ahead and then install some software on one of the users' PCs, those users will be able to connect to the server. It's as quick as that. However, there are lots of things that you can configure on the server, and I'm going to take you through those now. I'm not expecting you to remember everything that I'm going to show you now. That's the idea of recording this session, so you can sort of go back and look at this video a little bit later. The idea really is just to give you a flavor of the kind of things that you can configure and the kind of discussions that you may have with your customers to determine whether or not they want to make those changes. You're advising them on what can be done with the software, and then they can make the decisions on whether or not they want to do that that certain configuration. So what happens is, when you actually start up the software again, the UC Server software, you'll get a dialog coming up like this, like I had on the screen grab. You can go back into the installation wizard if you wanted to, but you normally go into the classic menu. And what the classic menu does is then brings up the sort of the dialog of all of the different sections that you can go through to actually configure the UC Pro server. What I'm going to do now in this session for the next sort of 10 or 15 minutes is just literally go through each one of these screens and just talk you through the key points on each of these configuration screens so you understand what they do. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory. You can probably look through these and work out what most of them do anyway. But let's take a quick tour through some of these screens. Let me just clear my screen at the back here. I should mention that actually when you go into the classic menu, 3 or 4 of the screens that I'm going to show you are actually the ones that we saw when we went through the wizard. That was the idea of the wizard, to take you through just the screens that you need to go through to actually get the the software up and running. So we're going to kick off with the activities. Let me bring that one up. So the first screen is called Calls. Not very exciting on my demonstration system because nothing's happening at the moment, but I've got a client running on my PC, so if I literally just dial somebody, you can see I'm dialing extension 202, and that call has now appeared in the call section. So it's literally a display of all the calls going through the UC Pro server. And obviously on a real system, you'll see lots of information and calls stopping and starting all the time. So it's just a sort of an activity display. Availability shows you the current availability of all of the users that are actually registered on the system at this particular point in time. Again, you can see I'm set available at the moment. If I just pop in and change my availability to something else, then it shows it in a meeting. So that shows you all of the users using the system, what extension they're on, whether they've got call forwarding set, and what their current availability status is. Let me just turn it off. That's the availability screen. The session screen actually shows you the individual sessions that are running at this particular point in time. These are the UC Pro client sessions that are connected to the UC Pro server. So you will always see the bottom one, and don't be confused by the fill names. This bottom one is actually the server itself. That will always be in the session. There is a session running for the server. This one is me running my configuration. That's this configurator program that we're actually running. In fact, I beg your pardon, the top one is the server. This one is the configuration, and the bottom one is my UC Pro client that's running on my laptop. In a real situation, you'll see lots and lots of these sessions for all of the other users that are currently connected through to the UC Pro server. So that's the kind of activity section, gives you a good idea of what's going on through the UC Pro server. The enterprise section, some of these we've seen already. So we saw the licensing screen when we did the initial wizard. You wouldn't generally go back into this screen, except down below you can actually see what you're licensed for, what the client is licensed for. So in this particular example, you can see this demonstration system I've got has got 3 standard licenses, no extra licenses, and 3 integrator licenses. And the software that I'm running on my laptop, which is the only one running at the moment, is an integrator version, and that's why this is saying that one version is being used. So it's concurrent licensing, so you can see the numbers going up and down as users connect and disconnect from the server. Obviously, from a client point of view, if they run out of licenses, they need additional licensing to be able to cater for additional users. The only other time you go into this screen would be if the client, the customer, wants to move the UC Pro server from one physical server to another one. Then you would need to use the release license feature to release the licensing from this hardware in order to be able to then do the reinstall and pick that licensing up again on the new server. Generally, you don't go into the licensing screen too often. Client security, I'm going to come back to that one in a moment. Let me just show you users first of all, and then the client security one makes a little bit more sense. The users screen shows you all of the current UC Pro users that are set up on the system. You can see in my demonstration system I've just got a handful of users. How do these appear here? How do these get created? Well, there's various ways. One is that you can manually create users. So you can go into the add section and you can create a user. You can say which extension they use. You can set up the user, literally on a manual basis. If it's a small customer, that may well be the way that you do it. A much more elegant way and a much more efficient way of doing it is you can allow that when the software is installed on a user's PC, when that software is configured to talk to the UC Pro server, and the first time it connects to the UC Pro server, it will automatically create a user account on the UC Pro server. So you don't have to actually physically create that user account. It gets created dynamically. And that's a much better way of doing it. You can go around installing that software on users' PCs, and when they first use that software, it creates a user account for them, generally based on their Windows login and password. Okay, so picking up from where we were a moment ago, what I was mentioning was that clients can be created, or users can be created on the UC Pro server by having the software do that creation. Now, the screen that you can see, the slide that you can see, the top half of that where it says the local network clients, this allows you to control that process. It may be that your customer doesn't want this facility to actually take place. It doesn't want software creating users, left, right, and center. So you can control that and allow that to take place with the top half of that. There's also an anonymous option as well. You can, with the software installed on your PC, you can actually use the software without actually logging in to the UC Pro server. Again, it may be that your customers don't want that and that they want all users to actually log in to the UC Pro server. So the options that you have available, you can either allow or disallow those two features, whether or not the user is on the local network or whether they're coming in across the internet. Chances are you might want to disallow things as users come in through the internet, whereas you may want to allow them as they come in through the local network. So that's one of the sort of examples of you having a discussion with your customer to work out what it is they want to do with that. So on the Edit User tab is where you can actually edit information about the individual users. You can set up various bits and pieces, including their email address, their password, their department. There's also some options that you can tick down below as well. Again, as you first get up and running with this, you'll probably just create user accounts, but then later on you might start to add additional functionality in there. As an example, the email address is in there to allow you to actually send emails through UC Pro. If you don't provide that email address, then the send email facility that's in UC Pro won't work. So there's an example of the sort of configuration that you would need to do. There's a couple of other areas in terms of the Active Directory integration that we'll talk about just a little bit later. The telephony tab, which is also on the back end of the user definition, where you actually set up the extension that the user is tied to. Not only their desk phone, but they may have other extensions as well. They may have a secondary desk phone, or maybe they have their mobile device twinned through the phone system as well. So you can set up different extensions for users as well. Again, that might be something you might configure a little bit later. Security policies, we didn't look at this on the sales presentation, but the idea of a security policy is that there are lots of things you can do in the software. You saw lots of things on Tuesday that is possible. What you can do is you can actually limit some of that functionality to individual groups of users. So for example, it may be that I showed you the messaging, for example, or I showed you the editing of the address book. It could be that you have certain users that you don't want them to use that functionality. So what you can actually do is you can create a security policy. Let's call it, in this particular case, a sales team security policy. You can tick all of the different options that you want this group of users to be able to do, and then you put those users into that particular security policy. Right, yeah, on the slide you can actually see the smaller of the three definitions as a policy drop-down box. It's currently set to default. You can actually then set that policy for that particular user. So you can say that user belongs to that policy. So what you're doing there is you're actually allowing your customer to pick and choose which of the facilities that can be used within UC Pro, and then working out which of the users you want to have that ability to do. So one of the best examples is the address book. It could be that you only want certain users to read the address book and other users to be able to update information in that address book. So security policies really brings the whole sort of functionality of UC Pro together and make sure the right users have the right functionality. Okay, that shows the equipment slide, so that's the next section that we're going to go through. No need to go through the site one because we went through that on the wizard. I guess the only time we're ever going to go back in here again is if you want to change the name of the site at the top, or in an extreme example where the customer actually moves physical location from one place to another, and therefore you would you need to change the dialing codes and the location. Looked at the phone system when we first did the installation wizard. Again, you wouldn't change that in any great detail once you've got the system up and running. The extensions tab is where we downloaded the extension information. You can go back in here at any time and add additional extensions if you want to. You can edit extensions, as we talked about on the initial installation. Again, you wouldn't go in here too often, but just to reiterate that point, anything you change in here in the terms of the extensions does not get reflected on the actual phone system itself. You're not updating the phone system when you're playing around with this extension information. It's just how these extensions are shown to other users through the UC Pro software. The trunks and the groups will be downloaded as part of the initial installation as well. Generally, you wouldn't go in here and change these as long as they're showing as on hook. That's usually a pretty good sign. You wouldn't normally go in and edit and define and change those in any great detail. That would get downloaded as part of the phone system download. So that's the equipment section. The biggest section to go through is the services section. This is the one where you're most likely to have the most dialogue with your customers in terms of what they need. Most of these features are cost option features as well. We explained this in the sales presentation. These aren't standard features within UC Pro. So you would have had a dialogue with your customers to work out whether or not they actually want these features in the first place. And if they have, and you put that through the licensing code, then these features will then appear in the configuration options. Let me just talk you through each of those features. The first one is the Active Directory integration. Now, we've talked about creating users manually, and we also talked about users being created dynamically when their software connects to the UC Pro server. The Active Directory integration is really designed for if you have large customers that have a large number of users that you're going to need to create on UC Pro. Because all of that user information is probably stored in the Windows Active Directory, then we can leverage that. We can get hold of that information and create UC Pro user accounts from the information stored in your customer's Active Directory. We can literally go in there and extract that information that we need. This is a license option. There's a cost involved in that. You can actually also define which users you want to pull down. You can't go in and cherry pick individual users, but you can use groups and containers to selectively pick which users you want to create on UC Pro. The reason I mention that is from a licensing point of view, it literally just, you need to have enough licenses to cover the total number of users that you're going to create or that you're going to download from Active Directory. So if you don't use group and container, it will literally just download or try to download every user from Active Directory. And if you've only licensed 100 users and there are 1,000 users in Active Directory, it will just stop after the 100 users. So you need to make sure that the customer is licensed for sufficient number of users that they want to pull down from Active Directory. And the way that you actually control which ones come down is with the container and the group options in the Active Directory integration setup. Just to put the context on that, in Active Directory, this is the screen that we're actually looking at. I've got a better screen grab with it actually filled in the background here, but this is the screen that we're actually looking at in the actual configuration. Let me just clear that and clear the fuzziness of that. Just bear with me a minute. There you go, you can see it a little bit more clearly. So this is the Active Directory configuration screen. To turn this on, obviously this won't appear if the customer isn't licensed for it in the first place. In order to turn it on, all you do is you click the activate the Active Directory synchronization. You say whether it's a local hosted Active Directory or whether it's Azure. You provide the domain name and the username and password for the UPN formatted username and password for the admin access to the Active Directory. Obviously you wouldn't want us just diving in there without sufficient admin access. Then you provide the container and the groups if you want to sort of limit which users get pulled down. And when you click the tick box, then it starts to just literally download those users and starts creating UC Pro user accounts on the UC Pro server. So as I say, recommended if you have a very large customer and you've got hundreds, maybe thousands of users that you want to create. If you have a very small customer with 10 or 20 users, it may probably more efficient to just do those users manually or use the the dynamic creation. Unlikely you want to use Active Directory integration for that. What you then do, once you've got the user information pulled down, in the user definition screen, so I'll just pull the configuration up, going to users, and if I look at a particular user, like my one, and I click edit, I have an option here that says Active Directory integration, and I can say which direction after I've pulled the information down, I want that information to be stored in. So for example, I can start to change users' names and departments, etc. If I change that on UC Pro, do you want me to push that back up to Active Directory, or would you rather have it that all of that information is stored on Active Directory and it's pushed down towards UC Pro? For each individual users, you can pick either a fetch or a send option. What we strongly recommend is that you don't mix and match. Either have all of the user information stored in Active Directory and have everything as a fetch, so every user is set up to fetch down to UC Pro, or have UC Pro as your central resource for that information and push that information back or send that information back to Active Directory. Strongly recommend that you don't mix the two. And then in that particular case then, if we're doing the send, on my example where I had my user, when I'm doing a send on my telephony, you can see that these options are actually ungrayed. I can actually change these options. If in this particular case here, where I had it set that I'm actually fetching the information, when you go into edit the user, you can't change the phone numbers because we're fetching that information from Active Directory. So that's the Active Directory integration. Another feature that we mentioned in the sales presentation is the Exchange calendar integration. The idea of this is that you can, within the default product, you can have users' availability updated in the present screen based on their Outlook calendar settings. That only works though if the user's PC is switched on, if the UC Pro software is running on their PC, and that software is connected to the UC Pro server. Now, if they're people that work out of the office quite regularly, then that would be a problem because they wouldn't necessarily be able to connect to the UC Pro server remotely. So their availability, the very time that they're out of the office and unavailable, doesn't get represented in the UC Pro present screen because they're just not able to communicate. The Exchange calendar integration gets around that problem by having the UC Pro server connect or communicate directly with the Microsoft Exchange server. So regardless of the individual user's status, whether their computer's switched on, whether their software is started or not, we can get their calendar information from Microsoft Exchange and update that information so everybody else can see that user's availability, even if they're out of the office and not connected to the UC Pro server. Again, you'll have a conversation with your customers to determine whether or not they think that is a feature that they require. If they have lots of out-of-office type users, then they will require Exchange calendar integration for those users. Maybe not all users, but maybe some of those that work out of the office. So that's also a licensed option. Switching that on works in the same way. So back in the configuration, you'll have a calendar integration option if they're licensed for it. And this is the screen that they fill in. And basically what you do is you provide the address of the Exchange server, the IP address or the name, a UPN formatted username and password, again for admin access to that server, and then you literally just tick the option and switch that option on. So as long as the customer is licensed for calendar integration, then that software will then be, or that functionality will then be switched on. So not particularly difficult to get it turned on. How to actually then use that facility is in each individual user's setup. So when you're looking at users on the server, so if we go into my user connection and we open up my fill one once again, there's an option here that says calendar integration. And if you switch that on, then I'm then using the calendar integration feature for that. So you need to turn that one on. Another one that's a bit of a gotcha, and we've seen this many, many times, is when you go into security policies. We mentioned those a little bit earlier. And if I edit a security policy, one of the options is view other people's other people's appointments. It's great having the calendar integration switched on so that users are publishing their availability. But if you have all of your users in a group that doesn't have this ticked, no one else will be able to actually see those appointments. So for users that you want to see other people's availability, they need to be in a group that has that option ticked, the view others appointments option ticked. That's a bit of a gotcha that catches people out from time to time. And that's what that screen grab shows there. Federation, that's another feature that's an optional feature within the product. Depending on your customer, you may have a customer that's literally located in one physical location, in one building, and they have one phone system. If that's the case, they won't be interested in federation at all. That's not something that's going to be of interest to them. If, however, they have multiple sites, they could go down the Go site route and just have a separate location connected into the main UC Pro server. So they still have the one UC Pro server, but connecting in their other sites to that server. Or they can go down the federation route where you literally have a separate UC Pro server installed at each of the other locations. And that's the particular case here. Let me show you how easy it is to actually set up federation. We'll do it for a two-site setup. You can see how easy it is to actually work through this. I've got this as screen grabs rather than as a live demonstration. So if we start at location number one, let's call this the head office, if you like. And this is where you instigate the federation. So this is your sort of home, your starting point. And what you actually do is you click on the allow federation first of all, to say that you can actually sort of allow the federation function to take place. Give the sort of the local place, the local location, give it a name, a standard sort of name, so you can actually identify with that. And then what you then do is you then start adding in the other servers that want to take place in this federation. Up to 6 can be part of the federation, but we'll just assume it's just 1 at the moment. So you click on the Add button in the Remote Server section. And in there, what you do is you change the mode into direct. You give the IP address of the other server that you want to take part in this federation. And then you click the Save button. And what you'll see, the display will update, and it will show that in your Remote Server section, you've got a sort of a pending request waiting for federation with this other server. So Acme Limited is the sort of name we've given to our home location. And this is the address of the other server that we're going to allow the federation. You then jump across to the other server that you've installed at the other location. You go to exactly the same screen in the configurator. And in there, when you open up the federation section, you'll see the pending request sitting there waiting to be accepted to get the federation to actually work. So you literally just click the accept, click edit, and then click the or select the select option, accept option, and that will then create that federation. So the two sites, if I go back to the original diagram, the two sites will then start communicating with each other. These two federation servers will communicate with each other. Where that was all done in the configuration, we're still in the services section in federation. It was all done in that section, either on this server or on the one at the other location. That's the federation option. I think I've completed that. A couple of other things just to mention briefly in the configuration, not cost related. There's no cost involved in these, but they're just in the services section. One of them is called archiving. The UC Pro software stores a lot of information about calls, incoming calls, outgoing calls, and messages. That obviously takes up a fair amount of space, and particularly depending on the number of users in this installation, that could be a fair amount of space. So what you can do here is you can set the defaults for how much or how long you want that information to be stored for. So the default for external calls is 60 days, internal calls is 7 days, and messages is 60 days. Your customer may want to extend that. They may have unlimited disk space available and aren't bothered about the storage, or they may want to cut that back. So you can actually change that through. So that's the services section. The final section to go through on the server configuration has got a couple of options in here. The first one is computers. And basically all that shows you is each of the computers on which the UC Pro server, the UC Pro's client software is installed. I'm running a demonstration system, so this doesn't have a great deal of detail in it, but that's my laptop I'm literally working on right now. There's my client running on that laptop. If I edit it and open it up, I can see information about the server or the computer that software is running on. I apologize that my laptop is so far behind running Windows 7, but it seems to be running perfectly well still, so it proves that it's fairly well backward compatible, the software. But there you get an idea of the memory and the disk space, etc., of that particular computer. That's quite useful information when you need to understand, where the software is actually installed out in the company. User settings. Now, this is probably, if you forget everything else that you see in this presentation today, this is the one that's probably the most useful in terms of your sort of helping the customer roll out the software. The way that this works is that when you go into the client software, we're going to go into that again a little bit later when we look at the configuration of the client software, but this is the configurator of the client software. Lots of things that you can change. And when you change those things, what you're creating on the UC Pro server is what's known as a user profile. So if I edit that user profile, you can actually see all the different options, lots of sort of ones and noughts and on and offs and tick boxes where everything's been set up. So every time I start up and I use my software, then the definition of that software, how I've configured that software, will be recorded on the server, and that software then behaves in the same way. So I could even be logged in using somebody else's software on their laptop. If I log in to UC Pro as me, then it'll pick up my profile definition from there. Now, there's lots of things that you can do and lots of things you can configure as a user. Your customer may not want their end users doing that configuration. They may not want users messing around with the configuration at all. Or it may be that they want certain things to behave in a standard way and that they want all users to have the software or a particular part of the software configured in a certain way. So what you can do is you can create what's known as a template profile that you can configure exactly how you want it, and you can then push that template out to one or more other users. So you're kind of enforcing that configuration on one or more users. So it's a very elegant way of getting that software configured in a standard way without having to rely on your users doing it, or without you or somebody else having to go around and manually changing that software on each individual user's computer. The way you actually do that is in the user settings, you go into tasks, and you say create new settings from user. It'll give you a list of all the current users that are set up. So the idea is you've gone somewhere, you've installed the software on a computer, you've configured it, and that user will then appear here as a dummy name or as your name, for example. So let's say, for example, it's my name, Phil. I click OK, and what it then does is it shows me all of the settings that are there. That I can actually change some of those settings around, but then I can then save this as, for example, the template profile. So when I click Save, you'll see down below now we have a template profile as well as all the standard user profiles that are in there. Once you've got that, you can then go into the Users section. You have a list of all your users. There could be hundreds of users in here in a real customer environment. And you can say, for example, that actually I want whatever I've configured for Phil, I want Wendy, Patrick, Libby, and Ian all to have the same configuration. Go into Tasks, Apply User Settings, and it'll say, okay, well, which settings do you want to use to overwrite the settings that are for those users already? And you pick up your template and override those settings. So that's a very elegant and simple way of pushing out that configuration without having to literally walk around all the offices doing all that work on a manual basis. So that concludes our look at the configuration and the installation of the UC Pro server. I just want to spend the next 10 minutes or so just going through the installation and configuration of the 3 individual clients. There's not a huge amount to show you on this. The assumption is you saw the sales presentation and you're familiar with what those clients actually do. This is just a case of just showing you briefly how to install them, and you'll see it's very simple, but also some of the configuration options as well. So we're going to go through the client installation and configuration. We're going to look at the PC client, the operator client, and the Mac client. We sort of explained all of these to you in the sales presentation. Start off with the PC client. In terms of what it runs on, you've already seen evidence that it's running quite happily on my aging laptop. So all of these operating systems are supported. It doesn't require a great deal of memory or hard disk space, and it can be installed in a virtual environment, so VMware or Hyper-V is perfectly fine. You need the software that you download from the Zycoo website, and you sort of need the IP address of the UC Pro server, but actually you don't, as you'll see in a moment. Do the installation, so just double-click on the installer and just click Next, Next, Next. It takes less than a minute to do the installation. It's very, very quick and doesn't require any particular input. Once you're installed, as you'll see with my client already installed and running here, when you click on the System Tray menu and you click on Configuration, that then takes you into the configurator for this particular client. And as you can see, as we saw earlier, you can actually pre-configure this using those settings that we set earlier. So what I'm going to do now is just briefly talk you through some of these options here. Some of these we saw in the sales presentation, so I'm not going to kind of duplicate some of the stuff we saw there. You can see that in the sales video. Just to sort of pick out a few bits and pieces as we go through the configuration. The most obvious one is the top one first of all. Ignore that says localhost. That's literally because I'm talking to the server running on my own laptop. What you would normally have there is the IP address of the UC Pro server. However, if you don't know that, or your customer or the user doesn't know that, if they click the detect button, it'll just go out into the network and hunt around until it finds the UC Pro server. And that was that UCP port that we mentioned earlier that you need, the 21059. That's the one that it uses. It listens for that particular detect button. In terms of this particular user, there's various ways that the user can log into the UC Pro server. The standard way, almost all of the time, will be using their Windows login. So their standard Windows username and password will be what they use to log into UC Pro. So if you're going to set those users up manually, you have to put those username and passwords in manually. If you're going to allow the software to create the user account, then it will create it using the user's Windows username and password. There are certain situations, though, where you might want users to be able to log into the software not using a Windows password or a Windows login. Maybe they've got a generic reception or something like that is their Windows login, but you want to actually identify them as a real person with a real name. Then you can create that user account with a standard username and password, and they can then provide that information through the configuration. But more often than not, it's going to be a Windows login. There is a facility to use do not login, and you can turn that on and off as you saw in the server configuration. The result of that is that you'll still use the software, but you won't be able to use messaging. You won't appear in the users section of the present screen, for example. There may be one or two users in your client's company that may not want to log in for security reasons or for whatever reason that may be, but very unlikely that you would need to use that too much. The interface option is quite an important one. At the very top, it maybe wasn't clear in the sales presentation, but we mentioned there's three versions of the product. There's a standard version, an extra version, and an integrator version. There aren't three versions of the installer. You don't have to pick a certain version and install that. You install the one piece of software, and then in here, in the configuration, you then say which of those versions you want this particular iteration of the software to be. And in my particular case, it's the integrator version. You remember when I looked at the server configuration, it was showing me the usage of my licensing. It was showing that we were using one integrator license, and that's how that actually kicks in. This is communicating with the server and using the integrator functionality. You can choose whether or not you want the software to start when Windows starts up. I don't, because I've got lots of demos running on my machine, but normally that would be ticked. You can change the language if you want to. You can change the default skinning, etc. You can choose whether or not you want the preview window popping up. If you saw the demonstration on Tuesday, you saw the little preview window pop up every time I had an incoming call. Normally that's what you want, but maybe you don't want that for certain situations, so you can turn that off. You can also turn it off for messaging as well. Users can set up hotkeys for different functions, so if they want to make a call, they can use that as F7. If they want to have an answer a call, they can make that F9 or F11 or whatever. So there's three hot calls that you can set up. There's also some cache history that you need to be aware of when you talk to your customers. If you have a customer where a user leaves and a new employee comes in and starts using that same user's computer and the software is still installed on that user's computer, what do you want to do about the contact history? Do you want this new employee to see all of the old information from the old user? Do you want them to see all of their old recent calls? Or do you want to clear everything down so they're starting from the beginning? You could deinstall the software and reinstall it, But a much quicker way is you can actually just clear the caches down. You can clear their old contact history, and you can clear their recent history away as well. You can even clear away the hints. So when you get the the help hints, as a user you say, I don't want to see this anymore. Well, if you clear that down, then those messages will then start to reappear again until the new user then says they don't want to see those messages. The dialing section, we saw this in the sales presentation. You can switch on the various options like the clipboard dialing, the application dialing. You remember the in-application dialing that I showed you, dialing out of the Outlook contacts, and also the dialing handlers as well, where I switched on my web page dialing so I could have my phone numbers that appeared on web pages as hyperlinks, and I could dial straight from those hyperlinks. Down below was where we set the minimum and maximum length of what is acceptable as a phone number, so it doesn't start converting 3-digit numbers into phone numbers or into hyperlinks. So you can say it needs to be a minimum of 7 digits and a maximum of 12, for example, and it must start with a 0 or a 4 or whatever that may be. So that's the section where you switch all of that information on. In the event section, we saw this in the sales presentation. This is where you can automatically change users' availability. So you saw a little bit earlier in this presentation today where I changed my availability to something else. That was done manually. This is where you can have things done automatically. So it will automatically detect that you're in an online meeting like you are right now and put you in an online meeting mode. It can detect whether you're, when you're away from your computer and turn on the away from desk availability status. If you lock your computer, you can then say, well, I want to make that my availability status to say away or on a break, for example. And you can switch on the standard Outlook calendar integration here as well, if you just want that integration rather than the full Microsoft Exchange integration. So lots of things you can do in activities. Availability, we saw in the sales presentation that you can switch on the click-through for Skype. So for example, if you're on a call on UC Pro, if you tick this box, then that will update your status on the Skype or link side of things. So anybody looking at you in link or Skype can see you're on a call, even though you're on that call through UC Pro rather than through Skype or link. That's the status of the busy light that we support. Shows up whether you're using that feature or not. And also briefly showed this on Tuesday, where you can actually set up automated functions in terms of your availability. So I've got one set up here already that says, when I'm in a meeting, automatically forward my phone calls to extension 201. So whether I set that status manually or it gets set automatically, the minute I go into meeting status in UC Pro, it will automatically, without me needing to think about it, switch my calls to extension 201, and then it will then come back when I come out of that status and switch my calls back to extension 204, my extension. So lots of things you can do based on your availability. When you enter that status or when you exit it, you can actually change the behavior of the UC Pro software. Lots of things you can do with that. Call events, these are quite useful things as well. You can control what happens on certain events. So when you get an incoming call, you might choose to show the larger phone window rather than the smaller preview window. You might want to go straight to the present screen, or you might want to pop the contact straight away. There's various things you can do when a call is ringing, when you first answer the call, or when you make an outbound call. You can change the way the software behaves for each individual user. You can set up sounds, so when a message comes in, you can just pick your favorite music and it'll play that when a message comes in, or when you've got an incoming call or whether you've got a call waiting. So you can change the sounds on that kind of thing. You can also set up integration events. You might find this quite useful for some of your customers. For example, let me just talk you through a simple example. So here, for example, I've got when a call is ringing, if that call is an inbound call, and if that call is an inbound call coming from somebody outside of the business, so not from an extension, what do you want to do? Well, then I can run this program. And I can actually, that program can be just give it the path name of where that program resides on your laptop, and that program will be run every time you get an incoming call from an external customer or external user. You can also have that being a web address. So rather than it being a program that you're executing from your laptop, it can be a web address. So every time this criteria is met, it automatically starts up a web page. It could be a room booking system or something like that. Just put the web address in the parameters, and it'll actually start that web page up for you. That's call events. Integration. This is where we set up the integration for the demo I did on Tuesday for Outlook contacts, but actually it's where you go to set up all of your different potential integrations. So if your customer is interested in the full integration with UC Pro, All of the currently supported versions or the currently supported products are there. Whichever one you choose, if I just pick Dynamics NAV, for example, it then comes up with a whole bunch of things that you need to fill in. I explained on Tuesday that we have a separate guide for each one of the separate products that we support for integration, and those guides talk you through what you need to fill in for each of these different options. So depending which one you pick at the top, you'll get a different screen appear and you have to put in different options. But that's where you do the configuration for the integration in the different in the different packages that we support. And then finally down below, there's a versions option that I just clicked on. That's really useful if you're talking to a customer from a technical support point of view and they have a problem and you want to know what version of the software they're running. Not only does it give you the version, but it also gives you literally each of the individual modules. So that's often very useful for technical support. There's a copy to clipboard function that means you can just copy that data out, get the customer to copy that data out, and then paste that into an email and send it over to you. And there's also a log as well that actually shows you the individual activity of what's going on. Again, that's quite useful from a technical support point of view. And again, you can copy that information out to the clipboard. So that's the PC client side of things. The operator is just as simple. The only difference is operator isn't supported in virtual environments. The actual requirements are pretty much the same, but operator has to run in a standard native Windows environment, not in sort of Hyper-V, etc. Again, just install the software in the usual way. You need the IP address of the UC Pro server. Installation program runs in the same way, and you get the configuration option coming up once you've got the installation done. All of the options that you see on the operator are actually the same as the ones on the PC. As I explained in the presentation on Tuesday, the operator is essentially just like a PC client. All of the functionality is still there, all of the events and messaging and history and all the other things you can do with the PC client. You can do those with the operator. The only difference with the operator is the actual interface that they use. They have that full screen that I showed you on Tuesday, where they can actually do the full operator type call control. The only thing you really need to be aware of in the configuration on the operator is, as well as configuring the extension that the operator uses in the same way that you do with the PC client, right at the bottom of the telephony tab, there's also an extensions box, and that's where you can put the additional extensions that you want this client to be able to monitor on incoming calls. So it'll have calls coming in on its interface on, in this case, 204, but this operator might want to answer calls for other people as well, and that's where you put those additional extensions. Other than that, there's nothing else that you need to do in terms of configuring the operator that's different from the PC side of things. That's the operator. And then the last one is just the Mac client. You may have customers that use Mac, so you'll be pleased to know there's a Mac version of the client. Again, fairly minimal requirements in terms of storage and memory, supported right up to the most recent version of OS X. The way the Mac client is installed is slightly different. It's shipped as a single DMG file. You just double-click on it to insert it or mount the disk image onto the Mac. That then appears as a device in the Finder, and then you double-click and you either drag that to the desktop or move it into the applications folder. Most people that use Macs tend to know how to install things, so as long as you send them the the DMG file, they'll know pretty much what to do with that. So that's the installation of the Mac side of things. The configuration, though, not so much to do. It's not as full function as the PC and the operator, so there's not a great deal to change in the configuration of that. But there's the options that are there are the same as the PC options. And the integration side, so the drop-down box that I showed you on the PC that had all of those software packages listed that we support integration for. Sadly, on the Mac side of things, then the only supported products are the OS X Contacts book itself and the Enterprise Edition of Salesforce. They're the only two that are supported on the Mac side of things. And that's the Mac installation as well. So that pretty much wraps up our presentation. When we do the video, we'll edit out the problem we have with the internet connection a little bit later. We're doing the same presentations, the sales and the technical presentations. We're doing them again next week, Tuesday and Thursday, so the same days next week, but at 3 o'clock UK time. So rather than 9 o'clock in the morning, we're doing them at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If you missed this morning, Tuesday's sales presentation, you can jump on the one next Tuesday. If you have any colleagues that weren't able to make it this week, if you let them know, then maybe they can get on to next week's sessions. But failing that, we'll have the videos available, so you'll be able to rewatch those videos as and when required. let me just bring Michael back in for a closing comment.
Thanks, Phil. Just the only thing to add is to go back to what you mentioned early on, in that if you haven't tried UC Pro yet, then please do download it from the Zycoo website. It does have a free 30-day evaluation license, so I do encourage you to give it a try, and also pass it on to your customers as well to see, so that they can see the business benefits from using UC Pro. There's obviously a lot of content there. If you've got any questions, then do please contact myself or one of the other Zycoo sales team. For Europe, we have a shared email address, which is eu@zycoo.com. So please do get in touch. And finally, thank you very much for attending today, and look forward to speaking to you again in the future. Goodbye.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael.